That's what we'd like to know today. And we've got Jimmy Akin with us for a fun Friday. It's always a fun Friday when Jimmy's around. So if you have a reason that you are not Catholic and you'd like to talk with Jimmy Akin about it, you are very welcome to call 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. There can be all kinds of reasons for not being Catholic, to no one's ever asked me, no one's ever invited me, to I haven't gotten baptized yet, and Easter is in 2.5 weeks, and anything in between. 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin is senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World and the Jimmy Akin podcast, and the author of a whole bunch of books, including The Bible is a Catholic Book. Jimmy Akin, thank you for being here.
Hello, how's it going, Psychelet?
It's going pretty darn good. Pretty darn good. We asked people yesterday to tell us why they're not Catholic, and they're generous enough to call, but this is another opportunity to do that. And maybe I should say, if you're not Catholic, we're going to put you at the top of the line. But if you're a Catholic and you need some help with someone else, you know, a family member or friend or acquaintance who you'd like to answer their objection to Catholicism, you're welcome to call as well at 888-318-7884. All right, Jimmy, question in already, and I am told to get to the questions as quickly as I can these days. So Sarah's in Colorado. Sarah, thank you very much for waiting. 30 seconds, I believe it was, but we're happy to have you. Why aren't you Catholic?
Hi. Well, I'm actually a new Catholic about 3 years ago.
Oh, all right.
And my parents are not, and my mom especially always is bringing this up. And I am always, and it's also something that bothered me before becoming Catholic, and I still can't find an answer. But we hear so many wonderful conversion stories from the Muslim world of Jesus appearing in dreams and pointing people to Jesus, and often telling them to go search out a certain person and they get connected with the church. But almost every conversion story brings them to a Protestant church. And I'm just so confused about why it's not brought straight to a Catholic church. And I wonder if you have a theory.
Well, this is a subject I've been aware of for a while, and I've been doing research on it, and I can tell you the present state of my research. So there are anecdotal reports, primarily coming out of the Protestant world, of people who were Muslim, who had a dream of Jesus, and then ended up becoming convinced of the Christian faith. And they have a wide range of different levels of practice. In some cases, they are in situations where they basically keep their faith to themselves, or they only talk with other people online about it, and they're not able to actually get baptized and become part of a local Christian community. There are others who are fortunate enough to be able to do that. At the present time, I don't have anything more than just anecdotal accounts. And so that raises several questions in my mind. One of them is this a real phenomenon? Because it could be that this is not a real phenomenon, that these stories are made up or exaggerations, that some of them could even be hoaxes, because we're dealing with essentially a rumor network about these. And whenever you're dealing with a rumor network, you don't want to put too much faith in the rumors that are circulating. I'm familiar with multiple rumor networks on other topics, not this, but on other subjects. And frequently the rumor networks are not very reliable. So what I've been trying to do is contact people who have direct personal knowledge of these, so that I'm not simply dependent. I mean, I'd love this to be true. I hope it is true. But I've been looking for people who have direct personal knowledge of the situation. And thus far, I've had trouble finding people with direct personal knowledge of the situation. So I suspect there may be a significant element of exaggeration or rumor inaccuracy here. So I'm not even sure if this is a sizable phenomenon. Now, Jesus can appear to anybody in history, and I'm sure that he sometimes appears to people with a Muslim background, but whether there is a present wave of Muslim conversions because of dreams of Jesus as opposed to other societal factors, that's something I'm currently leaving open because I just have not been able to get the kind of data that I would need to validate this. I have located like books about this, and I have, I have read books on this subject, but the data just is not concrete enough for me to be able to move this off of the it's just a rumor possibility and conclude that there is definitely a real and notable phenomenon here. Assuming, though, that there is a real and notable phenomenon here, well, I would say a couple of things about the reported difference between them becoming Protestant and them becoming Catholic. There are several factors I could see that are or that could be responsible for that. The first one is a variation on the initial question of could this be a reporting artifact? Maybe there are lots of conversions to the Catholic faith and you're just not hearing about them, in part because Catholics have a longstanding presence in the Middle East, including in Muslim countries, and they've learned to keep their mouths shut about situations like this. In fact, I've worked with Muslim converts in the Middle East, and we've taken very significant steps and elsewhere, not just in the Middle East but elsewhere, and we've taken very significant steps to keep their identities private so that they're not put in danger in their society or from their own family or things like that. So it may simply be that Catholics are more careful about talking about these matters compared to some of our more freewheeling Protestant friends. So it could be a data reporting artifact that is responsible for any disparity that's perceived here. Another possible factor that could be present is Protestants tend to be more freewheeling about their Christian community. Having a purely online relationship with people who share the Christian faith is something that many in the Protestant world might be more open to, whereas Catholics, being a sacramental faith, which some Protestants are also sacramental, but not all of them. There are other Protestants who are notably desacramentalized. Catholics might, be more insistent on you need to become part of a local Christian community. And if there's not a local Christian community that's publicly identified and can be found in their area, then they might go with the more loosey-goosey, you don't need to be baptized, you don't need to attend a local church, it's sufficient to hang out in an internet chat room. And so that could be part of what's going on here. And given that reality, it could be that, well, that's better than no contact with other Christians. And so some of them might be directed to find that kind of community. So I would say there are multiple unknowns here, and that prevents me from having any firm opinion in this area because of all the unknowns. But there are also factors that could be playing a role. This could be a data reporting artifact. It could be that there are cultural factors in certain forms of evangelicalism that are different than in the Catholic Church that are responsible. And so I think there are multiple possibilities here. And I wouldn't, if I was on one side or the other, I wouldn't be trying to hold this out as, oh, this is proof that we're right, because I don't even know if this is a notable phenomenon, if it's happening in any notable way right now, and there are multiple possible explanations for the appearances that you've described.
Interesting. Thank you. Those are very thoughtful theories, and I appreciate you taking the time to share them.
No problem. Happy to be of assistance.
Thank you, Sarah. That has brought us right to the break. 3 lines open right now. If you're not a Catholic and you'd like to share why with us, Jimmy Akin is our guest. 888-318-7884.
Catch Catholic Answers live anytime at Catholic.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Check out EWTN's official YouTube channel.
Just follow the link on our homepage at EWTN.com or go to YouTube.com/EWTN.
Watch EWTN's live shows or today's homily from the Daily Mass.
Click the upload button to see our most recent clips.
You can also find all of EWTN YouTube content by clicking the playlist button.
It's all on the official EWTN YouTube channel at YouTube.com/EWTN.
Visit today.
Welcome back. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Why aren't you Catholic is our question today. And if you're not a Catholic and you'd like to call and talk with Jimmy Akin about it, 888-318-7884. Many people do like to talk to Jimmy Akin, and a lot of it has to do with Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, one of the most popular documentary podcasts out there. Each Friday, a new episode, hundreds of episodes now. I think, unless I am mistaken, more than 400 episodes now available of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. That's good work, Jimmy. What dropped today?
Thank you. Today, we look at the mystery of radiation, because even though radiation has been around for not only all of human history, but almost all of cosmic history, it took humans a while to figure that out. And there was a crucial period of years between 1895 and 1900 where it all really came together, and there was a whole series of discoveries that built up into a modern understanding of radioactivity. And so that's what we look at, and there are some really interesting stories about how we discovered the different kinds of radiation and so forth. You may have heard of Wilhelm Röntgen, who was the discoverer of X-rays.
Oh, okay.
And he discovered them by accident working in his lab, and he thought he was going crazy. And so because they seemed magical. I mean, they can penetrate substances and you can't see them. So they're these invisible things, and they go through some things, but not others. It sounded crazy, especially in a world that didn't have the concept of radiation. So he squirreled himself away for a few weeks working on them. And then he finally decided, and he told his wife, people are going to say I'm crazy, but he finally asked his wife, Berta, to come in so he could show them to her, so he could get some kind of external validation that he's not just crazy. And so she came in and he showed her an X-ray of her hand, and she could see the bones of her hand. And this totally freaked her out.
Whoa.
Nobody had ever seen, the bones of their hand before with their flesh around it.
Right.
And she said, I have seen my own death.
Oh my gosh.
So she was horrified and wouldn't go in his lab anymore, but she confirmed to him he wasn't totally crazy.
Yeah.
Also, Nikola Tesla had done some work with X-rays, and he was not as careful as Röntgen was. Tesla was pretty freewheeling, and so he developed something that seemed to emit X-rays, and he thought, okay, let's crank it up to the max and then stick my head in it.
Oh, that seems,
and
yeah.
And he noticed that after having his head in the full power beam of x-rays for a little bit, he started to feel sleepy and had a distorted sense of time. And he concluded, I've found a new sleep aid that's safer than narcotics.
Oh, yes. Let's just all x-ray our heads till we fall asleep.
Yeah,
That seems like a good
exactly.
plan.
He quickly published a couple of additional papers, though, in which he concluded maybe that's not the best use of x-rays.
By the way, what did Tesla die of? Do we know? Because I'm thinking brain cancer might have been one of. No,
I don't believe that's how Tesla died.
Are you? Do you also cover gamma rays in there? Because I've done some science on gamma rays myself, and did they turn you green? Is there a chance that they'll turn you green?
Well, they did Bruce Banner, but not too many other folks.
That's where I did my research. I read.
But I do cover alpha rays and beta rays and gamma rays and other forms of radioactivity.
Someone needs to write a song about all those rays. It sounded very rhythmic the way you when you were saying it. All right, back to the phones we go. Lots of calls now. Why aren't you Catholic today with Jimmy Akin? If you want to get to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, by the way, mysterious.fm. You can go to Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel. You can go anywhere on earth that you get your podcast pretty much, and you can get Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. And if it's a discovery for you, you've got hundreds of good days ahead of you. Luke's in Ohio. Luke, welcome. Why aren't you Catholic?
Hi, I'm not Catholic because there's no marriage in heaven, and I feel like my God-given, masculinity is only makes sense in exclusive union with femininity, like a woman. And God is a father and not a mother, I know he's genderless, but he, his feminine side isn't, I don't know if he has a feminine side, but I just feel like I'm incomplete without femininity.
Okay. Let me ask you a question, Luke. Are you a Christian at all, or are you a non-Christian?
I'm a Christian, yes.
How do you, well, this is a curiosity question for me. I'll get to the substance of your question in a moment, but how do you square that? Because it's in the Gospels that there's no marriage in heaven. I mean, Jesus says that it's flat out in the Gospels. And so that's something that Christians in general have believe. So how do you fellowship and participate in a Christian community if it teaches that? Because it would seem to me that would be a reason not to be a Christian rather than not to be a Catholic.
Yeah, I mean, I left the Catholic Church and I looked at other Christian denominations, but that's I'm on the verge of kind of just leaving Christianity altogether, I would say.
I see. Okay. Well, I'll be happy to do my best to help with this question. So let me start with, let me pose a few questions here. So what's the purpose of having, speaking in the broadest possible terms, what's the purpose behind having the male and female sexes?
I would say to procreate.
Yeah, okay, good. I would agree. That's the fundamental purpose. Now, there are other lesser purposes, but that's the big one. And that's why a very large number of organisms on Earth have two sexes. There are a few that only have one sex, but the vast majority, including even plants, which we normally think of as asexual, plants actually tend to have both sexes. So we have a huge number of organisms with two sexes, and the primary purpose of that is procreation. So, given that the primary purpose is procreation, are there any phases of the human life where we're not procreating, and therefore where the two sexes don't need to be united? Can you think of any?
I would say when we're young.
When we're young, yeah, that's right. We're not procreating when we're young. We're not even able to procreate when we're young. We still have our sex, we're either male or female, but procreation is not for that phase of our existence. And so we don't need to be united with a person of the opposite gender during that phase. Also, I'd point out not everybody needs to be united with a person of the opposite gender. This is something that Jesus talks about. St. Paul also talks about it. And human experience points that out too. Not everybody has a burning desire to be united maritally or sexually with a member of the opposite sex. So some people, you may feel it more strongly than some people, and that would be an argument for you personally. Well, yeah, you want to get married, but not everybody is in that same situation. And Christianity has places, and Catholicism has places for that, where some people, their gift is to be married, and that's great, and they help procreate the species. And then other people, they have a different calling. They're not called to be married, and there's a place for them in the Catholic community too. So it's a community and a faith that accommodates these different modes of life that people are called to. But going back to the fact that we don't always, in all phases of our existence, need to procreate or even have the ability to procreate, and you correctly identified that that's the case for the beginning of our lives, well, then let's think about the next life. Because if our bodies have died, then are we going to be procreating in the afterlife?
I would say no.
Okay, good, and Jesus agrees with that. So if we have these two sexes so that we can procreate when it's appropriate for us to do so, but it's not appropriate for us to procreate when we're young, and if it's not appropriate for us to procreate after this life, then it would make sense that marriage is something that is for this life, for adults in this life. And the fact that there's no marriage in heaven actually makes sense. If we're not going to be reproducing in heaven, then it would make sense for us not to have marriage in heaven. That doesn't mean that we can't be spiritually and emotionally united to people of the opposite sex. In fact, I would say, I'm a widower, and so, I hope and pray that I'll make it to heaven and see my wife in heaven, and I'm sure we'll love each other even more intensely in heaven than we did on earth. And so there can be spiritual intimacy and love and happiness and all those things in heaven. It's just we're not going to be in a sexual relationship at that point because we're immortals and don't need to procreate to keep the race going at that point. So those are some of the thoughts that occur to me initially. Also, I would say that there's a caution that I should give about being guided by one's feelings, because feelings are subjective and they change over time. I make a policy of trying to sort of set my feelings aside when I'm looking at important questions like religion, and not think what would I want to be true or what would I find disappointing, but what do I actually have evidence for? And the evidence to me from the Gospels, which I also believe I have good evidence to trust, is that, well, we won't be Marian in heaven, and that seems reasonable. And so I've sketched a framework that I think makes sense. It sounds like you find certainly elements of it reasonable, Luke. So I would offer that for your reflection. Also, I have a book called A Daily Defense, in which I look at bunches of different objections. And since this is a concern that you've had, there may be additional material in the book that could be of assistance to you. And you're here in the continental United States, so if you want to hang on the line, Luke, we'll see about sending you a copy for free.
Hang on, Luke. We'd love to send it to you, a daily defense. And thank you very much. On we go, though, because there are lots of folks on the line, and we have. It's funny because I laugh because we start and we wonder if anybody will call, and then the lines fill up, and now there is just one line open. If you are not a Catholic and you want to tell us why you are not a Catholic, Jimmy Akin here to take your call and have that conversation. You really are welcome, and you really are doing us a favor when it helps to make for a good radio program. So please don't hesitate. If you're not a Catholic and you'd like to tell us why, 888-318-7884. I realize now we got to take a very quick break, so I will encourage you again to visit Jimmy Akin's channel on YouTube, because in addition to the podcast that I mentioned before, the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, he now has the Jimmy Akin podcast, exploring all kinds of mysteries of the faith. You just have a great time. You're exploring all kinds of interesting things like, well, I've already told Jimmy this before. Among my favorites are when he tries to tell me when the books of the Bible were written and talks about all the different evidence. It's like doing a little detective work to find out when the books of the Bible were written. Check it out at Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel. Right back. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore. Jimmy Akin, our guest, Catholic Answers Live. Why aren't you Catholic? Our question for you. A couple lines still open, 888-318-7884. Jimmy, you know what? You told it to me, and I was going to write it down, and I forgot it. But you said I could say where your YouTube channel is, and it is at youtube.com.
youtube.com/Jimmy Akin.
Check it out there. Dan's in Houston, Texas. Dan, thank you very much for waiting. Why aren't you Catholic, Dan?
Thank you. There's probably a little bit more than this, but two of the things that are kind of sticking points for me are I'll call it the admiration of Mary and days of obligation. I understand honoring Mary. I actually participate in the Rosary a couple times a week.
Good for you.
My son converted to Catholicism a few years back, and every time he's in town, we go to a Latin Mass. So there's a lot that I've learned to appreciate being a Southern Baptist that I never thought I would. But these things are kind of, it seems like there's in my opinion, there's a little too much attention paid to Mary. Not that she doesn't deserve our honor and our praise, but it just seems like there's, maybe a little too much.
Okay, well, do you have any concrete examples of what you regard as too much? Or is it more of just a general impression?
It's more of a general. I mean, when I go to the Catholic churches, I see a lot of statues of Mary, and I was looking, and at one point it seemed like and maybe I didn't notice everything correctly, but it seemed like I almost saw more statues or images of Mary than I did of Christ himself.
Well, okay, so I guess a few thoughts on this one, and then we'll deal with your concern about holy days of obligation. So I would be careful about anecdotal impressions of, well, how many statues of who are found in a given church. I can't say, because I haven't seen the churches you've been in, I can't say that they definitely don't have more statues of Mary than of Jesus, but I would be very surprised if they did. Jesus is God and Mary is not, and Catholics recognize that. And so there has been in many Protestant circles for, the last 500 years, a narrative that tries to make it sound like Catholics care more about Mary than they do about Jesus. And, given that there's 1.4 billion Catholics in the world, I'm sure that there are some somewhere who have a disordered sense of priorities, but this is more of a hostile narrative towards the Catholic Church than something that's actually true. So, I wouldn't go with just an impression like this. I'd look, if you're concerned about how many statues there are and who they're of, I'd count them up. And I wouldn't forget that it's mandated by church law that during Mass there needs to be a crucifix with the body of Christ on it, on or near the altar. There is no such requirement about statues of Mary being in the church or near the altar. So if you're concerned about them, I'd make sure that you're not letting an anti-Catholic narrative that you may have heard in the past influence your perception of things. In other words, I just recommend, checking out perceptions and see, is this perception accurate, or could it be looked at in some other way, or is it even just inaccurate? Now, I say all that assuming one should care about exactly how many statues there are, but Dan, being a Southern Baptist, I assume you've read the Gospel of John. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then you'll be familiar with Jesus's high priestly prayer in John chapter 17, where he prays for the unity of all of his followers, right? You're familiar with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we know the will of our Lord is for us to be united, and we therefore shouldn't separate over issues that aren't particularly serious. So even if it were true that Catholics put more emphasis on Mary than you're comfortable with, sounds like it couldn't be that much more, since you're already, showing respect to Mary and you're saying the rosary and things like that. So you recognize that it's good to have, honor for the Mother of our Lord. And if there's you may feel that Catholics do it a little more than you prefer, but my question would be, is that something we ought to separate over? Is that something that we should let divide us? Just a matter of emphasis. If we both agree that that Mary, as the Mother of our Lord, needs to be honored, and certainly he honored her because he obeyed the 10 Commandments, which include honor your father and mother, and Mary herself says in Luke that, behold, now all generations are called me blessed, and we're a generation, so we need to honor her too. If it's just a question of, is there a little too much honoring going on here? That to me sounds like something that we shouldn't let divide us. we should seek to build bridges and not really sweat the fact that, well, some Christians put a little more emphasis here than is my personal taste. Also, there are varying degrees of emphasis in different Catholic communities. It's not all the same. So I guess that's kind of what I'd say about Marian devotion. The other subject you raised was about holy days of obligation. Can you help me understand your concern here?
I recognize the importance of being in church.
Good.
And I guess to a certain degree, it's just the word obligation.
Mm-hmm.
And
okay,
am I obligated to go? Yes, I guess, to a certain degree in my relationship with Christ. But I don't know. I guess I've just never, growing up the way I did, I've never heard that particular phrase used, and it seems odd to me that that not going to church on certain days is a sin. I mean, and yes, I can understand that again, we are, that's where we belong. That's where Christ wants us to be. So I get part of that.
Okay. So let me, and that's all good. And you're right. The term holy days of obligation is not commonly used in many Protestant circles, including in the Southern Baptist tradition. So, I understand how it can sound unfamiliar. But again, differences of language is something that I don't think should. So if it's just the word obligation, well, if it's a matter of phrasing, then I would suggest that's something that shouldn't divide us, because St. Paul says twice, actually, not to quarrel about words. So if we agree on the substance, we shouldn't let the way we phrase what we teach separate us, because that's just language differences, and different communities have different languages, and the New Testament even tells us not to quarrel about words. So let's think about the concept of what's supposed to happen on holy days of obligation, or what Catholics refer to as holy days of obligation. You're right that that we need to be in church, and you're right that that's what the Lord's will is, that we worship Him in church, and we worship as a community. There are other verses in Scripture that back that up, like when Hebrews says not to forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as is the custom of some. That pertains to, we need to go to church on certain times as to worship God as a corporate body. But what about the idea of an obligation? Think about the 10 Commandments. Do the 10 Commandments have any requirements in them about doing or not doing things on certain days?
True.
Yeah, they do.
True. That's a good point.
And these are commandments, right? They're not 10 suggestions or recommendations.
Right.
So so using the word commandment instead of obligation, you could call these holy days of commandment rather than holy days of obligation. They'd mean the same thing, but basically the Jewish Sabbath was a holy day of obligation for the Jewish people. Now, it's subsequently been replaced by the Christian Lord's Day, the day of our Lord's resurrection, but it's fundamentally the same thing. And actually, of all people often don't realize this, but in church law, Sunday is the primordial holy day of obligation. It's the king of the holy days of obligation. There are a few additional days in the year that commemorate some special things that are also holy days of obligation, but Sunday is the big and most frequent holy day of obligation. And it corresponds to, it's not the same as the Jewish Sabbath, but it corresponds to the principle we see in the 10 Commandments that we need to devote adequate time to worship and rest. So if the Jewish people had a holy day of obligation, and the Sabbath is just one of them. But if they had this concept and Catholicism has the same concept, then I would say that this is something that if I were in your position, I wouldn't stress about, because there's a rational biblical basis for it, even if the term is a little unfamiliar. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Well, I hope that this has given you some stuff to think about. My psychic sense tells me Cy is about to say we need to go to the break, but I hope that that gives you some things to think about. And since you're also here in the U.S. and are interested in issues like this, let's see if we can send you a copy of A Daily Defense too. Just hang on the line.
That's right. Hang on the line. Dan, give us an address. We'll send you A Daily Defense, 365 days, +1 to becoming a better apologist. A whole bunch of, well, I just told you how many different topics covered in one-page format. I think you will really enjoy the book, Dan, so do hang on and give us that address. Jimmy Akin, he didn't say spidey sense, his psychic sense, but I have my suspicions that maybe it was a radioactive spider that gave those powers to him. I'll find out, but we'll be right back on Catholic Answers Live.
According to some versions of Spider-Man, it was a psychic spider that bit him.
Oh, the spider itself was psychic?
Yeah, it was transmitting its power to him.
I had no idea. I can hardly speak to you without learning, Jimmy. I can. All right, right back with more Why Aren't You Catholic on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
With news from EWTN's Rome office, you can watch all the important events from Rome, even if you don't have TV access. Using the latest technology, we've made it possible to watch the latest news from the Holy See, all delivered directly to your home via live streams. Watch live on EWTN's YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and X.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. It's Friday, and people are calling to tell us why they are not Catholic. And these make for great programs. We're very grateful to everybody who calls. I have to say, Jimmy, most of my knowledge of Spider-Man comes from watching the old cartoon show as a kid. It was my second favorite cartoon show.
Oh, what was your first?
Thank you for asking, Jimmy. Speed Racer.
It seemed like a setup. Speed Racer. Okay.
I couldn't miss Speed Racer. I had to watch Speed Racer every afternoon.
Speed Racer was not in syndication where I grew up, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah.
And if you like, if you like the old Spider-Man cartoon, I had recently, the famous theme song from that.
Yes.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
Yeah.
So in the Simpsons movie, that came out a number of years ago, there's a scene where Homer has a pig and he's holding the pig up to the ceiling and having it walk across the ceiling, and he's singing Spider Pig does whatever a spider pig does. And then on Mysterious World, I had someone email me because I had mentioned, or I think I'd mentioned it first, but they wrote in about a genetic experiment that had been done on some goats, where they spliced spider genes into the goats that their milk contains spider silk, and then you can milk them and then distill out the spider silk and use it to make Kevlar and stuff like that. So this was a way to try to get a larger animal making more of the silk for you, because spiders are teeny and hard to milk. But this person wrote in about it, and I talked about it on the show, and I thought about the theme song from the cartoon, and I thought about the scene from the Simpsons movie, and so just for fun, I went to AI and said rewrite the lyrics to the Spider-Man theme song, only make it about a spider goat, and it did. And then I went to another AI that makes music, and I said, write songs for this, and it did. It gave me 2 of them, and then I contacted my my video editor and said, I want to turn these into segments for when we do the spider goat answer in our feedback segment.
Yeah.
And so he used a third AI that makes video animation to produce animations for Spider Goat. And so we had these 2 animations in that one episode, but I said, and I didn't tell the audience I was going to do this, but I decided I wanted to use Spider Goat as a recurring joke at the beginning of each of our listener feedback segments. So now, after we get done talking about the mystery for the week, we suddenly have this animation of this superhero Spider Goat swinging in with a mail bag, distributing mail because it's a feedback segment. And it's,
Oh, man,
look
Jimmy.
out, here comes the Spider Goat. And then we do our feedback.
I have
and
to
this
say,
has become a regular
I had
thing now.
no idea what I was getting involved in when I started this. That is awesome. So Spider Goat actually exists. Jimmy Akin created Spider Goat. Very nice. All right, wait, where am I going on the phones? Oh, I'm going to Florida. Kyle's down in Florida. Yes, Kyle's down in Florida. Kyle, thank you for waiting. Go ahead with your question.
No, yeah. So my question to Jimmy is has to do with Nicaea specifically and their understanding of Christology. So I've done a lot of research into Christology, reading like Brian Petrie, some other scholars like I can't remember top of my head, but yeah, I've read a lot of literature on Christology, how sort of like, I guess, a historical defense of Jesus' claims to divinity, and I don't deny that Jesus did claim to be divine. My issue is understanding what divine meant in that context, because when you take a cognitive, historical, graphical approach to what divine meant, it did not mean this binary thing of God versus no God. It meant Jesus held the divine name so that he could forgive sins in God's name, he could do miracles in God's name, he can speak on behalf of God without being identical to God in the Nicene sense. So my question is, how do you reconcile Nicaea with that original context?
Well, I would say that that the term divine and its Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew equivalents are not univocal. They don't have just one sense. Like many terms in many languages, including English, the term divine has multiple senses. And so I would say it's a mistake to simply identify one sense of the term divine and say, oh, that's what Jesus must have meant. It's like in English, the term divine has multiple senses, and I bet even Cy Kellett knows some of them. So Cy Kellett, can the term divine refer to God, to the big G himself?
Heck yes.
Okay.
Sorry for the harsh language.
So far as you're aware, can it also refer to other heavenly beings? Could you say like angels are divine beings?
Yes.
Because they're associated with God and do things in God's name.
Yes, that is a common usage.
Okay. How about churchmen? Are churchmen, like Anglican bishops, ever called divines?
Yeah, I think that's a very British way of speaking, but yes, that is right.
So we've got, and then there's, of course, Divinity candy, right? You know, it's that white nougat with like typically a pecan put in it. your mom may have made it for you at Christmas time.
It's called Divinity candy?
Divinity, yeah. It's a candy.
Oh, I have not had that, no.
Oh, you'll want to check this out. But when you try Divinity, you're likely to say, "Oh, wow, that tastes divine," which is where it got its name. So, so there are multiple senses of the term divine, and it would be a mistake for me to say, "Oh, well, Jesus said he was divine, therefore he must have been an Anglican clergyman," when there are these other senses that the term could refer to.
Right.
And so I can't simply say, well, it was used this way, so that's what it means in this case. I have to be sensitive to what information I have about how it's being used. Now, I recognize, yeah, you could describe someone who carries God's name and does miracles in God's name and things like that. You could say, yeah, that person's divine. They're doing a divine ministry without being God. But that's not all that the New Testament has to say about Jesus. It also makes it clear, and this is in multiple different passages, but in particular, it's clear in the beginning of the Gospel of John that Jesus pre-existed and was there at the beginning of all things. So he wasn't just a man that got born in this life. Also, St. Paul, who wrote some of the earliest Christian literature we have, he makes it clear that all things were created through Jesus, and thus Jesus pre-existed and was at the beginning of all things. So he wasn't just a man. And St. Paul more than once refers to him as God. And so we have additional data about Jesus by people who were closely associated with him and were part of the early Christian community. And they say things that portray Jesus as more than just a miracle worker who you could say, well, he carries God's name and he's divine, but that actually indicate that Jesus pre-existed and is actually called God directly by St. Paul, among others. So, Dan, that's some of the information that I would bring to bear on the subject. I know you mentioned, I think you said you'd read Brant Petrie on this. Is that right?
Yeah, Brant Petrie and some other scholars.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot of different approaches to this question, but
I was going to mention too that I think
by the way that you mentioned.
Yeah, well, before we move on, I want to mention two additional scholars you might want to check out are Richard Bauckham, Bauckham, and also Larry Hurtado, Hurtado. They've both done work on primitive New Testament Christology, and you if you haven't read them, I'd recommend them. We're getting really super close to the end of the hour, so if you have something you'd like to follow up on, say it real quick so I'd have a chance to respond.
Most scholars who defend the traditional view, I'm glad you mentioned Richard Bauckham, because that's one of the scholars that I've read. It's just been a while since I've been studying this stuff for a long time. So his model requires you impose a binary framework of divinity onto the text. So you did mention John, and I think you mentioned Paul as well. But I think both those traditions are working off. So I think if you look at the original context, I think both Paul and John, the book of John, whoever wrote John, they're working off the wisdom tradition. So essentially, Jesus is identified as bearing the divine name of wisdom, which in the Jewish tradition was referred to as the Torah.
Kyle, we're getting into pretty deep waters here, and we've got less than 2 minutes left on the show, so I'm afraid we're going to need to leave it there for now, but you're welcome to call back in the future, and we can talk some more. But there's a limit to how deep we can go with some of these concepts on live radio, given the format constraints. But I'm happy to help you out to the extent I can.
Kyle, we're going to have to leave it there, and I will say thank you to you for that call. Hey, there's some lines opened up, as you might expect, as we get to the top of the hour. So if you are not a Catholic and would like to tell us why you're not Catholic, As you can see, they've been very pleasant and enlightening conversations thus far this hour. That's what we'd like to do second hour. But if it's a challenge that you would like to pose, you're welcome. If it's a curiosity you have, or if it's just something you'd maybe like to understand better, and you're not Catholic and you want to tell us about that reason, 888-318-7884. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We'll just be gone a couple minutes and then we'll come right back. 888-318-7884. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. And if you're not Catholic, we're holding the phone lines for you today. Why aren't you Catholic? We'd love to have that conversation with you. If you call and tell us why you're not Catholic, you'd be doing us a big favor. That'll make a good program. We, of course, are Catholics. That's why it's called Catholic Answers Live. But we sure love talking with people about Jesus, about the church, and about maybe your concerns about Catholicism. 888-318-7884, 888-318-7884. Jimmy, we got the news today that Chuck Norris had passed. God bless him and rest his soul. He must be one of the most memed people in the history of the internet. I don't know if they keep records of this.
Well, I assume he's kicking butt in the afterlife now.
That's got to be on somewhere. But you know that people people just love to make them a Chuck Norris meme. So
he was 86, so he got up to a nice age.
Yeah.
And which also coincidentally is a death number, but
I don't know what that means. 86 is a death number?
Well, it signifies death. If you 86 somebody.
Oh, right, because the restaurants. That's an old restaurant terminology. If they're out of something, you have to 86 that item, meaning take it off the menu. So
I'm not sure that's the origin, but I'll have to look that up.
Well, that's what I heard. And usually if I hear it, it's true. Like if I hear it from a guy, I think probably someone I was sitting on a bus with or something. That usually turns out to be true information.
I'm not saying they don't use 86 as a code in restaurants. I'm just not sure that's the origin of it.
All right. Well, again, prayers for Chuck Norris and for his family, and bring on the memes. Looking forward to seeing what people come up with in the next few days. Why aren't you Catholic? Well, Eli is in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, as a matter of fact. Why aren't you Catholic, Eli?
Hello, my name's Eli. I'm 14 years old, and my dad, he's Catholic. My mom's Seventh-day Adventist, and I attend both a Catholic church and an Adventist church weekly.
Wow!
But the biggest thing, that is
a little closer to the phone, Eli, because I really want to hear what you have to say.
Eli, I think you may have your phone on speaker. If you could take it off and hold it directly up to your ear, that would help us out.
All right, can you hear me better?
Much better, yes.
Oh, much.
Thank you.
All right. So the main thing that I can't really understand about Catholic theology and why I can't really fully accept it is purgatory, because as Protestants, that's something that they don't believe in, and it's not in our 66 books of the Bible. And I was just wondering if you could explain and enlighten me so I can figure out why we should believe or believe that purgatory exists as Christians.
Okay. Now, you said that you, in addition to attending Catholic church with, I guess, your father, you also go to a Seventh-day Adventist church. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I assume you have other family members who are Seventh-day Adventist. So the issue of purgatory is wrapped up with another issue that is not a source of concern for the vast majority of Protestants, but it does happen to be an issue that needs to be discussed when it comes to Seventh-day Adventists, because Seventh-day Adventists commonly adhere to a position known as Christian mortalism, or it's also sometimes called soul sleep. And the basic idea is that there are no conscious experiences that a soul has between the point of death and the point of resurrection. Is that something you're familiar with?
Yes. I believe that it's,
Okay. Do you yourself, are you committed to that, or are you open to the idea that that there are conscious experiences between death and resurrection?
Well, for what I know so far, that's what I believe, but I'd really love to learn, and if you can, you show me what you know, and I'll show you what I know, we can come to a conclusion. But I believe that whenever you die, it's like a sleep, and whenever Jesus comes again, the second coming, we'll wake up, and then we'll go to heaven or hell, and there's not really anything in between, any purgatory and stuff.
Okay. Well, we should get this issue sorted out first before we hit the issue of purgatory. So let's see if we can do that. There on the traditional Christian belief, which is that there are experiences in the intermediate state between death and resurrection, which is the perspective of the overwhelming majority of Christians in world history of all stripes. There is no second dying. So everybody who doesn't live until the second coming dies at some point, but that's the only time it happens. So, certainly before the resurrection, it's the only time that happens. So, so that's the first point I'd make, because it sounded like you referred to not wanting to die again. And I would assure you, nobody in traditional Christianity believes you die again before the second coming. Having said that, do we have evidence that souls have conscious experiences between death and resurrection? And I would say, yeah, we have that in the New Testament. For example, and we also have it in the Old Testament, but I'll stick to the New Testament. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, and both Lazarus and the rich man and the patriarch Abraham are all presented in the intermediate state between death and resurrection, and they're presented as having conscious experiences. The rich man is suffering, and the Lazarus and Abraham are comforted, and they have a conversation with each other. So we've got conscious experiences depicted for them in this parable. Now you could say, well, this is just a parable, and that's true, or presumably true. It's the only one, I would just note, it's the only one of Jesus's parables where a character has a name. And that name, Lazarus, is the same as a guy we also know about who really did come back from the dead. So there's at least a question in my mind about how parabolic is this. But a more fundamental point I'd make is Jesus's parables are based on real world situations. So he tells parables that involve kings and servants and fathers and sons and farming and harvests and all these different, and money, and all those things are real. They're in the real world. In the real world, there are kings and servants and fathers and sons and farming and crops and harvests and money and all of that. So if that's true of Jesus's parables in general, it should be true of the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, which features conscious entities in the conscious human entities in the afterlife. So I would say we've got evidence here. Now, it doesn't say it flat out, but I would say this gives us evidence that there are conscious human entities in the state between death and resurrection. But I don't have to stop there, because if we go to the book of Revelation, we have multiple passages where there are humans in heaven who are depicted having conscious experiences even though they're currently dead. Like under the fifth seal that Jesus unseals, when he pops the seal off, John hears the voices of the martyrs under the altar in heaven, and they cry out to God saying, God, how long are you going to wait before you do justice for us? And we're told that the martyrs are told that they need to wait a little while longer until the full number of martyrs that are destined to happen have happened, and they're given white robes to comfort them. So here we've got these heavenly martyrs. They're dead because they're martyrs. They're in heaven. They're having conscious experiences. They're calling out to God. They're comforted. They are told to wait a little longer. We also have others. Later in Revelation, John sees a group of people coming up off of the earth, and his guide says, "Who are these folks, John?" And John's like, "Well, you're the heavenly guide. You tell me." And the guide says, "These are those who come up out of the Great Tribulation." So they're newly arriving martyrs who have just been killed for their faith. So they're having conscious experiences as well. So and this is not just something we find in these passages. We also find it in in loads of Christian literature all the way down through history. In fact, I just finished a script for my Mysterious World podcast that's going to come out the last week of April, where I walk through early Christian literature and show examples of early Christians encountering the spirits of departed humans. This is something that's been there all the way through human history, and it's something we now have scientific evidence for, because since the 1970s, scientists have been studying near-death experiences where people come close to death, their heart may even clinically stop, so they are clinically dead, and yet they report having conscious experiences, and they interact with other people, including ones they knew who have been dead for a long time. They have conversations with God. They have a review of everything they did in their life. And in general, they show evidence of having conscious experiences even when they're in a state of death. So I would say both biblically and scientifically, we have evidence for conscious experiences in the intermediate state. So that's what I'd have to say about that. Cy Kellett is going to tell us we need to go to the break in a moment. So why don't we come back and talk about purgatory on the other side?
Oh, okay. Eli, if you'll hang on, we'll get this break done as quick as we can. We'll come back and talk more about purgatory with you. Catholic Answers Live, Jimmy Akin, our guest. Just one line open. If you're not Catholic and you want to tell us why, you can have that line. 888-318-7884.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at Magnificat.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Coming up on EWTN Radio, we're celebrating the Annunciation and remembering Mother Angelica. And of course, bringing you Catholic Radio's premier shows featuring Lent, A Season of Grace with Father Cedric Pesena, EWTN News in Depth, Sunday Lenten Reflections, The Miracle Hunter, and more. EWTN Radio, your source of truth that allows Catholics to grow in their faith and recognize the true mission of the Catholic Church.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Eli in Texas, in Dallas, Texas, on the line with us. Eli told us he's 14 years old. Now, Eli, I forgot. I think it's your father is Catholic and your mother is Seventh-day Adventist?
Yes, that's correct.
And you are struggling with the idea of purgatory.
Yes, that's what it is.
Okay.
Okay. So before the break, we discussed evidence for a conscious intermediate state between death and resurrection. So to deal with purgatory, I'm just going to assume that there is a conscious intermediate state. Although actually there is a way I'll get to where there would be a purgatory even without that. But for the moment, let's just assume there is a conscious intermediate state. Well, the purpose of purgatory is to free us from disordered desires that we have in this life that tempt us to sin. This is mentioned in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, for example. So, it's clear, I would say, that we're not going to be sinning in heaven. The Revelation says that nothing impure shall enter the heavenly city. So I would say we're not going to be sinning in heaven. But, question for you, Eli, are you likely to be completely free of all temptation by the time you die? Or do you suppose that that you may still be dealing with temptation at the point of death?
No, I will not be free from all temptation and sin by the time I die. Not even the Pope, I know, he's not tempted. He's tempted, but everyone we try, and no one's perfect. But to that, I would say that whenever we die, and we be raised for the second coming, that whenever we get into heaven, we are in our same bodies. We take to heaven our character, but in there we cannot sin. There's no need
Okay,
or willing.
Eli. Yeah, Eli, I'm not saying anything. You're not saying anything that I would disagree with at the point of the resurrection. But if I can tie up the chain of reasoning I was exploring, if you agree that you're still going to have to deal with temptation, and even if you personally didn't, loads of people do, have to deal with temptation up to the point of death, and then you're not going to be sinning in heaven, whether that's at the resurrection or before the resurrection, then between death and heaven, something has to happen to free you of those disordered desires that we call temptation. Now, how that happens is an open question. Whether it takes time or happens in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, that's an open question. But there has to be something happens that frees us from those disordered desires. And if it doesn't happen before death, well, then it's going to happen after, but before heaven. So, so that's what Catholics call purgatory. And the Catholic Church doesn't really narrow down much more about purgatory than just there is this purification from disordered desires. And it might take time, it might not take time. It's done because of Jesus's work. We're sanctified or grow in holiness over the course of the Christian life. And this is just the last, and we grow in holiness because of Christ's grace. And this is just the final application of Christ's grace to get us where we need to be in order to be ready for heaven. So that's all the Catholic Church teaches about purgatory. Now, it is commonly understood among traditional Christians, including Catholics, that this is something that happens either at the beginning of or sometime during the intermediate state before we get to the resurrection. But even if you were absolutely convinced that there are no conscious experiences prior to the resurrection, well, okay, fine. That doesn't do away with the need for purgatory or purification of temptation. That's just something that would happen in the first moment when you wake up at the resurrection, and bam, God's going to heal you then. So the concept of purgatory really tends to be compatible with just about everybody's view of the afterlife in Christianity, and it would even be implied on the Seventh-day Adventist view. They may not use the term purgatory for it, but they would seem to acknowledge the reality of, yeah, if we're not perfect at the end of this life, we will be in the resurrection. So what do you make of that?
Yeah, thank you. You really answered my question. Like, the way that purgatory has been described to me or taught to me was a little different. So I think you kind of clarified it, and I can agree with most of what you just said. So yeah,
Awesome.
Thanks a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, no problem. And if you're interested in checking out additional information, like I mentioned, I've got that episode coming up in April about conscious experiences in the afterlife that have been reported in Christian history. The title of the episode is Ancient Christian Ghosts. That's something you could check out. Also, a while back, I did a 2-part look at Ellen Gould White, the sort of the founding prophetess of Seventh-day Adventism. I talked about her in episodes 229 and 230 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. You could find those on my YouTube channel, or you could go to mysterious.fm/229 and mysterious.fm/230. And in them, I do not make a theological critique of Ellen Gould White. I did a lot of special research to just say, okay, how credible is she as a prophet? And so I did not do what many people do who have critiques of Ellen Gould White, where they look at theological disagreements they had. Instead, I just looked at, let's look at just the issue of prophecy. So I set aside all theological debate and just looked at both pro and con arguments for is she credible as a prophet, And I would also recommend episodes 229 and 230 of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World uh, to hear what I had to say about that. And I hope it's helpful.
Eli, I would like to send you that book, A Daily Defense, if that Jimmy gave to a couple other folks.
Yeah.
Answer a bunch of your questions about the Catholic faith. If you'd like it, give us an address and we'll send it off to you. We've never talked about 14, but I think that's old enough to give your address. If it's not, ask your mom or dad, and they can give us an address and we'll send it off to you, Eli. I'd love you to have it in any case. Let's go to Javier in Los Angeles, California. Javier, thank you for waiting. Why aren't you Catholic?
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
So happy to, Javier.
I grew up around Catholicism as a kid, going to Mass and CTD and stuff like that. But I was never baptized or received any sacraments.
Oh, really?
My mom was the one that would take us more often to Mass, but my dad wasn't really practicing Catholic himself. But when I was about 13, he had a strong conversion and took our family to evangelical Pentecostal churches, and it changed his life for the better. But for me, it was a culture shock. It kind of threw me off of like religion in general. So a lot of my 20s and 30s, I just was more agnostic atheist. But some struggles in my adult life, I started praying again, and now I'm at 40 now, and I'm drawn to Catholicism for some reason.
Good.
Maybe something that I missed out as a kid, but so my question is like, what advice do you guys have in a journey to learn more about the Catholic Church? I have family members that might fight back with even considering this idea, and those struggles of I'm sorry, just relation struggles that I foresee.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me first ask you a question. So, are you presently married?
No.
Oh, okay.
I am actually divorced.
Okay. And do you have children that live with you?
Yes.
Okay. Well, so the reason I ask is, you're an adult, and so even if you have family members who might oppose the idea of you exploring Catholicism or becoming Catholic, you're not under an obligation to tell them immediately. Now, if your wife was living with you, well, you'd kind of need to let her know fairly early in the process, not necessarily immediately, but and at some point before you would become Catholic, you'd need to let your kids know. But there's not an immediate urgent need to tell anyone what you're looking into. So if you foresee there could be conflict over this and you're not wanting to deal with that conflict at the moment, I would say, well, then look into it, do your study, but don't tell anybody, because you're not under any obligation to tell anybody. What you do with your soul is your business. And we do have, eventually people will need to learn about it, not necessarily before you become Catholic. When I was becoming Catholic, I didn't tell my parents initially, and I did let them know before I was received into the church. My wife was dying at that point, and so they kind of gave me a pass and didn't want to add any more weight to my journey at that point, given my wife was dying. But I actually never told my grandmother. I knew she would object very strongly, and rather than telling her myself and prompting a confrontation, I let her learn organically through the family. So she came to know that I was Catholic, and she didn't want to talk to me about it. And so she was not a fan of the Catholic Church at all. And so I used a non-confrontational way of letting her know rather than force the issue by talking to her directly. So in your situation, Javier, unless there's a special reason that someone needs to know, I would say you're not under any obligation to tell them. It's certainly not immediately until you know what you're going to do. So I definitely let the kids know if you decide you need to become Catholic, or even, you want to start going to church and maybe bring them along. That's all great, but I'd say take it easy and take it slow, and just put one foot in front of the other at a time. I definitely want to make sure we give you a daily defense, though, so hang on the line.
Hang on, Javier. If you'll give us an address, we'll send you Jimmy's book, A Daily Defense, and help you with that investigation. And call back anytime. We'll take a quick break. Right back with more Catholic Answers Live. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com, or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. A little bit of groovy music for you, helping you as you head into the weekend. We're awful glad you're here with us. Jimmy Akin, our guest. I have just really enjoyed the conversations today. I think putting Why Aren't You Catholic together with Jimmy Akin has been a stroke of genius on our part. And yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've got several folks on the line. I think if you want to get in that line and tell us why you're not Catholic, we will be able to get to you today, 888-318-7884. Going to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Christian in Philadelphia. Welcome, Christian. Why aren't you Catholic?
I'm not Catholic because I just have a lot of disagreements with going on in the churches. Like, it's a lot of rituals, and I don't find that stuff in the Bible. Like,
okay.
Jesus said you should pray to the Father, and then there's only one Father. So I don't know why
Catholics do that.
Father. Yeah, they're breaking the law already.
Oh, I see.
Oh,
calling priest
okay.
Father.
Well, so let me see if I want to make sure. I'm sorry?
Are the priests trying to be the Father like God is the Father?
Nope. Priests are not the Father the way God is the Father. Let's deal with that subject first, and then we'll go back and talk about rituals, which was the other subject you mentioned. So, Christian, you're a human being, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, just wanted to verify. So you have a father, correct?
Yes.
And do you ever call your father father or dad or papa or anything like that?
Call him Dad.
Dad? Okay. Is your dad in the same way God is dad or Abba?
No.
No. Okay. So we see there can be humans who are not God, and we're all agreed they're not God, who can be referred to as father, even though they're not fathers the way God is a father. So God's the ultimate father. We agreed on that. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So then we come to a question now, because in Matthew 23, Jesus says, call no man father and so forth. But was he intending to prohibit? We have to ask, what does he mean there? One possibility is that he's prohibiting anybody from ever using the term father for a human being. And he's wanting to restrict it to just being used for God. On the other hand, it's possible that he means it in a more restrictive way, like don't confuse anybody else's fatherhood with God's fatherhood. So we need to figure out which of those possibilities, and there could be others, but those are the two I'd like to suggest for your consideration. Which of those do we have evidence that supports? Would you say, Christian, that we have evidence that Jesus was prohibiting anybody from ever using the term father for a human?
Christian?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was that a yes or a no? Mm-hmm.
Yes, prohibited. Let's call him father people.
Okay,
People on
let's
earth.
explore that then. Let's explore that. So when Jesus is 12 years old, this is in Luke chapter 2, and his Mary and Joseph find him in the temple. Mary says to him, your father and I have been looking for you. And he's referring to Joseph as Jesus's father, meaning his adopted father, not his biological father, because he doesn't have a biological father. Would you say that Jesus would say that Mary broke the rule by referring to Joseph as Jesus's earthly father, about not calling other people father? Was Mary breaking that rule?
No.
Okay.
No.
How about when we look in the book of Acts and we find Stephen or Paul or other people addressing a gathering of Jews, and they say things like, brothers and fathers, I got this message for you. Are they breaking the rule that Jesus established?
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Oh, maybe.
Not sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's then look at other New Testament authors like St. Paul. You would agree that when St. Paul writes his epistles, his letters, that they're divinely inspired, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So when St. Paul writes to Timothy, he refers to Timothy as his son, implying that he's Timothy's spiritual father. Did that break Jesus's rule? Bearing in mind he's writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. No. Okay, when St. Paul writes to the Corinthians, he says, I became your father in the faith. Is St. Paul breaking the rule there?
It's probably like, no.
Okay.
No. When John writes to his readers, he refers to them as my little children, implying he's their father spiritually. Is he breaking Jesus's rule?
It's pretty Jesus going now. I don't think it's that. It's just probably like maybe Jesus wanted. I don't know really what he meant, but
Okay.
I
Well,
thought I
that's
took it
fine.
like literally. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say when we look at the example that's set by the apostles, including when they're writing under divine inspiration, they could perfectly well describe themselves as spiritual fathers and their converts as their spiritual children. And that would not seem to break Jesus's rule, because the
I got
Holy
you
Spirit
going.
was
Yeah.
was inspiring them to say this, and that would you'd end up pitting what the Holy Spirit says against what Jesus said. So I would suggest that we have pretty good evidence that what Jesus meant was not don't ever use the word father for a human, but something much more restricted and commonsensical, like don't confuse the fatherhood of any human with the fatherhood of God. Does that sound reasonable, like something maybe you could think about in the future?
Yeah, it makes more sense.
Okay, awesome. So I hope that helps with that issue. Now, you also mentioned the issue of rituals. Okay, well, we don't have a lot of descriptions of what early Christian services were like. We have some indications. One of the things, and I won't go through it all, but I would make a few points. The first one is if you look in the Old Testament, they had the Jerusalem temple and they had a priesthood that they offered sacrifices, and the Psalms were, basically the hymn book that they had choirs singing at the temple and so forth. You would agree that in the Old Testament, there were quite a lot of rituals that were part of Jewish worship, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the question would then be, did God want Christians to overthrow all ritualism, or did he expect Christians to have some form of ritualism just like he had instructed the Jewish people to have? So, we need to look for evidence and say, well, do we have any evidence that Jesus told the first Christians to chuck out all the ritual and not do any rituals anymore? I can't think of any passages where Jesus says anything like that. Can you?
No.
No, yeah. So given that we have a precedent in Jewish worship for using rituals, and Jesus never says, can all the rituals, guys, I would expect that precedent to inform Christian ritual. And in fact, we have evidence it did. You've probably heard the prayer, the ending that some people use for prayers, forever and ever, amen. That's actually a fusion of forever and ever, which is what they would say in the temple, and amen, which is what they'd say in the synagogue. And Christians fused those two as part of our own Christian prayer tradition. Also, Jesus gave us the Lord's Prayer as a model prayer to say. He also gave us the Lord's Supper, or as Catholics call it, the Eucharist, to be part of Christian worship, and that's a ritual. And then when we look in the book of Revelation that depicts what's going on in heaven, we see them using rituals up in heaven all the way through the book of Revelation. So I would say that there's a good bit of evidence in the New Testament that ritual is meant to be part of Christian worship. And this is really cool. A lot of people don't know this, but we actually have a description from the mid 2nd century. This is around the year AD 150. So this is like 100 years after the time of Jesus. We have a description of how early Christians worshiped. The early church father, St. Justin Martyr, he's writing to explain to non-Christians, here's what we do in our worship services, because there were a lot of rumors that we were committing crimes and cannibalism and stuff. So he writes to non-Christians to explain, no, guys, this is what we do in our service. And he outlines the Christian worship service, and it's the same as the Catholic Mass today. So the Catholic Mass, actually, we can show it being used all the way back to within 100 years of when Christ was crucified for us. So I would say we have good evidence from both the New Testament and from right after the New Testament that that indicates ritual is meant to be part of Christian worship. I'd like to also send you, Christian, a daily defense so that you can explore more questions, but I hope that what we've covered so far has been helpful.
Christian? All right. Well, Christian's still on the line, so we can give him the book.
Okay.
Christian, if you'll hang on, we'd love to send that book to you. You said you left Catholicism. You were gracious enough to call us. As Jimmy said, please call back, and we'll continue the conversation. And perhaps you'll
hang on right now so we can get your address and send you the book.
Don't go anywhere, Christian. We want to send you the book. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Why Aren't You Catholic? On Catholic Answers Live with our guest, Jimmy Akin.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 2013. EWTN News Nightly launches from Washington, D.C., bringing news and analysis from a Catholic perspective to TV viewers and radio listeners worldwide.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Lots of folks have been gracious enough to call us and tell us why they are not Catholic. We appreciate that. Jimmy Akin is our guest this hour. We're going to Springfield, Missouri now. Stuart is in Springfield, Missouri, and we're very grateful for the call. Stuart, why aren't you Catholic?
Actually, first, let me.
Hang on, Stuart. Hang on just a quick sec. Sorry.
Let me say howdy to Stuart. You're a neighbor of mine. You're just over the Missouri line.
Not too far away.
I got to go look at a map. I never know what's next to anything. Springfield, Missouri is right next to Arkansas. Is that what I'm supposed to accept here?
Just above. Correct. Yeah, Stuart's about an hour north of me.
I'll believe it when I look at a map. You two go on with your conversation. I'm going to look right now.
Well, I actually am Catholic, but I work with a dispensationalist that is Bible alone, and we both love talking about Jesus, and so we get into frequent debates, and of course, she's really heavy into prophecies and such, and there was something I was listening to somewhere, I can't remember where I heard it, but it sounded like, or it just kind of like my eyes opened to the fact that all of the Old Testament prophecies have been fulfilled in Jesus. And so, like, you know, when she's talking about all these things and related to things today, is there something I can tell her or talk to her about it for the fact that they have all been fulfilled? Is that true, I guess?
Well, I wouldn't say they've all been fulfilled. I would say many of them have been fulfilled, but there are still prophecies to be fulfilled at the second coming. And there are also Old Testament prophecies that in one way or another point to events in our future. What I would say is that the dispensationalist, the common dispensationalist belief that the book of Revelation and the central part of the book of Revelation, which is basically chapters 4 forward, that all of that material pertains to our future, I would say that's mistaken. And you're in luck because not today, but last Friday, I had an episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World come out where I look at the book of Revelation and I talk about the major theories about it. Dispensationalism is, and for people who may not be aware, dispensationalism is a theological system that really got started in the early 1800s. So it's very recent in church history. And it has a view of Revelation that is a variation of a position called futurism. And futurism holds that at least like chapter 4 of Revelation to the end of the book, all that information, all those passages are in our future. And that's one of 4 major interpretations of the book. Futurism is. And in last Friday's episode of Mysterious World, which is episode 408, I go through those 4 major theories as well as a 5th minor theory, which does hold that all prophecy has finished. And I talk about how these different positions developed, and I talk about evidence for and against them, and I end up ranking them in a tier list. So I think that would be very interesting for you to check out, and it gives you the basics of how different positions on Revelation work and what I think is a reasonable approach to it. Your friend might also find it interesting. I also have other videos. If you search my channel on things like the Mark of the Beast or just Revelation, you'll find other videos I've done about Revelation and Bible prophecy, and you may find those interesting as background for yourself or just out of curiosity, and they may be helpful for your friend as well. In fact, you could say, hey, I found this video, why don't we watch it, and maybe we can discuss it afterwards.
Yeah. One other quick thing, I guess. So anytime, like, she's all Bible alone, so whenever I try to prove my point biblically, her argument is always, well, that's your Bible. That's not the right Bible. So I've tried to give her the history of how the Bible was compiled, but it she has none of that. So
okay. Well, so for your additional research, I wrote a book a while back called The Bible is a Catholic Book, and we'll send you a copy of that. You can read it. It'll give you more data. She might be interested in reading it at some point, but if she's really telling you, well, that's your Bible, that's not really relevant to the discussion of prophecy, because the only differences in terms of the books that are in the Catholic Bible that are not in the Protestant Bible don't interact very much with prophecy. So you can appeal to the same book of Isaiah and the same book of Revelation and the same passages in the Gospels. They're not any different. Now, she might mean they're a different translation, but that really isn't relevant, because Catholics and Protestants don't have translations these days that are substantially different from each other, unless she's like a King James onlyist or something.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I've told her. I was like, if you read both, I'll give you a copy of mine. They're probably not that different, but I just curious more on the prophecy thing.
Yeah, I'd volunteer to read from her Bible, and I mean, unless it's a really old one like the King James Bible, it's going to say pretty much the same thing that the Catholic Bible says.
Yeah. All right.
I've got good news for you. I looked on a map, and you were both correct. Arkansas is right next to Missouri. I learned something all the time.
Last week I'm in Northwest Arkansas, so I've got Oklahoma just to the west and Missouri just to the north, and so hearing from neighbors on both sides these past 2 weeks.
Well, Stuart, thank you. Hang on. We want to send you the book. All right?
All righty.
Thank you. Let's go down to Florida. Susan in Florida. Thank you for waiting, Susan. Why aren't you Catholic?
Well, I am Catholic, actually, and this is probably not the right format to be asking this question.
Well, let's give it a try. Let's see what you got.
Okay. So I'm a cradle Catholic, and I was brought up Catholic and kind of fell away, but I did get my children baptized, and also they received their first Holy Communion. But that's as far as it went. So I didn't follow through with all that, and I'm wondering, they don't go to church now. But if they did come back to the church, do they need to receive their confirmation, or because they haven't received all the sacraments they should have up until now? How does that work?
How old are your children? Are they adults, or are they in between somewhere?
Yeah, they're 40s and 50s.
Okay, so So the answer is they would need to be confirmed, and they'd need to take some education classes before that. But that's not the first thing they'd need to do. Basically, the first thing they need to do is go to confession. And they could make a general confession, doesn't have to be long, but it should cover, what they need to confess, any mortal sins that they can remember committing. And God will forgive the ones they don't remember because they're not deliberately holding anything back. So once they've gone to confession, well, they've already been initiated into the Eucharist. So they can, as soon as they've gone to confession, they can start receiving the Eucharist again. And then at their convenience, they can go ahead and get confirmed, but they can begin living lives as sacramental lives as Catholics as soon as they would go to confession.
Okay.
Or how would that work?
Susan, we missed something. I'm sorry. Could you just repeat that? I apologize.
How would they get confirmed? Do they need to take OCIA?
Well, they need to take some kind of education classes. It might or might not be OCIA, but basically, what you there are different ways this could be handled. The thing to do would be once they have gone to confession and are living life as a Catholic again, then they can approach either the pastor of their parish or one of the priests or the church secretary and say, I need to see about getting confirmed, and they can in the parish they can then hook them up with the process for how to do that there locally.
Okay. I just want to be ready, in case they come back and they say, yeah, but I haven't been confirmed. Well, I can tell you how to go about that, Yeah. Okay.
It's real easy.
I keep praying
and
for
you
that
don't,
one day.
And praying for it is good. So is inviting them. You can say, hey, I fell away and, I didn't get you all the way through, but I've decided I need to, live life as a Catholic again now. And I want to make sure that I do what I would have done knowing what I know now, which is to help you. And so I'd like to help you come back to the church too.
Susan, we'll send you a copy of A Daily Defense as well. Maybe there's some questions that you could get answered there. I'm going to go quickly now to see if Garrett in Pennsylvania, can you ask your question quickly to give Jimmy a chance to answer it, Garrett?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Jimmy. My question is how would I put it? It is, it would be, we don't have an infallible list of infallible dogmas. Yeah. Like, how exactly do I know what is infallible, what is not infallible?
Gotcha.
If I would ask a Protestant, how do you know what books go in the Bible? You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, you need to learn the criteria for when infallibility are engaged, and then you need to look at how a teaching has been articulated by the magisterium in order to know whether it's infallible. I wrote a whole book about church teaching and how it works. It's called Teaching with Authority. And if you'll hang on the line, Garrett, we'll get your address and send you a copy of the book. And you can read in it's basically a theological manual on this subject. So you can read in substantial detail about how to determine the different levels of authority that church teachings have, including all the way up to infallibility.
And Garrett, thank you for being quick with that question. And I know you will enjoy the book, so do hang on. Let us send you a copy of that. Thanks to everybody who called today. It was a real privilege to get to talk with folks. Some searching for answers about the Catholic faith, some having objections to the Catholic faith. But Jimmy, I thank you for taking all those calls. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Oh, I didn't get to ask you what dropped on the Jimmy Akin podcast on Monday.
This week it was a debrief on the resurrection, and coming up on Monday, it's an interaction with Frank Turek.
All right. Well,
Protestant apologist.
Check out Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel. Check out his podcast wherever you get your podcasts, The Mysterious World and the Jimmy Akin podcast. That will do it for us. We'll see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.